get to be interns and like the real fun starts. This seems like fun, but like,
oh my God.
I know, right? This was just to get you started, right? So we're gonna do diagnostics today. First half here, second half we're gonna be outside. We're gonna have snacks. It's gonna be fun. At the end of class, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the future, next steps, right? How that's all gonna work. Spoiler alert, it's still a little bit uncertain. Yay, COVID. But next year's gonna be great. I think next year is gonna be, well, at least better than this year. Like, let's hope for that. So we're gonna do a couple of committee updates really quickly. The first one I'm actually gonna do. This is my desperate plea. So we have a really, really amazing blog that our county runs. You might have seen the articles. They post typically twice a month. It's not stressful. That blog has been long running. It's really, really amazing. We do to-dos. If you have not seen the to-dos for December, go check out our blog because Gary does them entirely in rhyme and they're phenomenal. They are December-themed rhymes, okay? So just like, it's my favorite post of the whole year. So that's really exciting. The blog was started by Ann Barnes, and then a woman named Andrea Lane took it over. Andrea has actually recently moved out to the mountains. She is actually now trying to start a master gardener program in the county she lives in out there because she has the energy of like 1,000 suns. What happened then was that the blog didn't have an editor. And so that fell on me. And what does the editor do? The editor posts the twice a month articles. One of them is from Gary. It's the to-dos. He always sends it on time. It's easy. The other one you round up. It's not hard. If you have any interest or any proclivity towards WordPress or learning WordPress, I would love to teach you WordPress. Let me know. The blog is looking for someone who can do that posting. It's a great, great, great opportunity, especially if you need flexible hours. Right? Like if you need hours you can do when you can get to them, the blog is like social media, right? It is very, very, very flexible. So just reach out to me about that. Even if you think that's too much, but maybe you might want to write an article a couple times a year, I would also love to hear from you. So reach out to me if you have any interest in the blog. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. It's durhammastergardeners.com. It's a really cool resource. There's a lot going on there. So that's one. I'm going to end with you if that's okay. So Bev, do you want to talk about your awesome opportunity?
Hi guys. Haven't seen you for a while. Congratulations on today. It's so exciting. Can you believe it's already here, or does it seem like a million years? Went fast? Went fast. Yeah, just wait till you're in a couple of years. You're like, wow, when did I train? I can't remember what year that was. But anyway, I'm here again to just mention that we need seed starters. If you're interested, if you've grown veggies, if you haven't grown veggies but you're really attentive to your plants, I'd be glad to talk with you, answer any questions, share what we do. It's a fun group, it's not all work. We relish in our achievements. Every year at the end of the year we have a tomato tasting event where we all get together and share not only the tomatoes we've grown for the sale, but tomatoes that you might have grown on your own. So we just do a fun little event to taste, gosh, 50 tomatoes this last year was amazing. So it's a fun group. We provide everything for you. We're going to do our sale, I think, early April, maybe. And I can give you my number if you think you're interested. I'd be glad to call, and talk with you if you want to give me a call. It's 919-672-0123. Really easy. And I'll be around a little while if you guys want to work on it. If you guys have any questions, I'll hang out for a little while and we can just talk one-on-one. We can get together for coffee or something if you want. Don't have a lot of room, but I think we're going to have a couple of spaces. All right? Anybody have questions now?
Can you give that number again, please?
It's 919-672-0123. It's Bev Tishy.
And part of the cool thing about seed starters too is that we do set you up with all your supplies. So we're going to give you the pots, the soil, the seeds. We're going to give you everything. If you need lights, we can typically get you lights that you can use while you're doing that. So it's really like if you've been thinking about getting into like learning how to start veggies, and you're already kind of like, we do ask that you be a little bit meticulous because like we're hoping to get plants back that we know what they are.
Right. It does take somebody who wants to spend a little bit of time. I mean, even if you work, though, you have plenty of time to do it. But it just takes somebody that's a little detail oriented. You need to be sure to get tagged, get them ID. So, I mean, it happens. It happens every year. We sell something that doesn't turn out to be what it's supposed to be. But we get better every year.
It's always the right species.
It's always the right species. Yes, it is the right species. That is one thing we can tell. But yeah, they take a little bit of attention, but you just can't water them once and come back in a week. But they're inside. They're inside your home. So yeah, it just takes a little bit of attention, but a lot of reward, and we're a good group. We're fun. I think I have so much fun, but that's what I love is the veggies. So just let me know, and I'll hang around. And
what's your name again, please?
it's Beverly. It's Beverly, but you can call me Bev. It's a mouthful.
Okay.
The last name is T as in Tom, I-S-C-I. That means it's dry. I think. Yeah.
Brutal. All right.
Just put it in the email.
I'll go find it. All right, guys. I'll be around.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll get it in the email too. And then, all right, we have, okay. I'm seeing a lineup in the hallway. I'm trying to figure this out. All right. Donna. Let's actually get Donna. So, Donna Rewalt is our director here at Cooperative Extension. We knew she'd pop in at some moment, so we're just going to take a moment for Donna.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Donna Rewald. I am the County Extension Director. I've seen many of you. You've been with us for months now, and we are excited to have a new class of Master Gardeners. So I want to congratulate you first on getting through all of this, particularly at this time. I also want to thank you for your kind of compliance with all the policies and rules. It's pretty amazing. We've been successful in having a large class of Master Gardeners in the building without real incident. We've had a large class of farm school in the building without real incident. And I think people didn't necessarily think we could do that, but I had a lot of faith in with our wonderful program staff here and also all of you. So I really appreciate that. I wish I could say there was some kind of normal we were getting back to, but none of us know. We don't even try to guess that anymore, so I'll give up on guessing that. But what we do know is that people are growing things in Durham, and you guys are an essential part of helping us reach more people. And you all, of course, I'm sure all of you are doing really cool things yourselves. That's one of the greatest things about Master Gardeners is finding out about all the cool things you are doing too. So I really hope to get to know some of you over time as we interact in our different places and in different spaces. But if you ever need anything or want to chat about anything, we're always open to ideas. We really run on the power of trained volunteers, and you all are a huge part of that. So I just want to thank you for being you and being here and doing all of this. So anyway, so that's all I have to say.
Woohoo!
So, okay. Bye, y'all. Take care.
All right. Okay, Monica.
Has this class been like this? Revolving door?
The beginning of the classes, it's so that we don't do it all at the very first class, and then everyone already kind of glazes over by person 5 and goes, oh my God, why is this happening?
Right? Here you go. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this gorgeous Carolina day. I hope you like this weather. If you don't, wait 5 minutes. Isn't that what we say? My name is Monica Menzie, and I am the chair of the Speakers Bureau. And I am so happy to meet you, my future fellow Master Gardeners. We love adding to the team. Happy to see everybody everywhere you can be, want to be in this organization, and there are a lot of places that you can be. So, as members of the North Carolina Master Gardener volunteers of the Extension Service, we know that part of our job, now that we've received this fabulous training, is to extend this knowledge to the general, in our case, our job is the general public. Her job is everybody bigger than that, and that's a big job already. So we try to take as much off of her as we can. The way that you can do this, as you know, is to be in the office and work on the computer and on the phones, right? Phone calls generally are messages you get to call back, not a big deal. This is an easy gig. The next, did you guys meet Jackie McLeod?
Yeah,
No?
public events. Yes,
Public
you
events.
did.
So this is where we staff the tables at EnoFest, at the farmers markets, at anywhere that we are asked to hang out and answer the general public's questions about anything that they can come up with regarding with gardening. And they really do, and it's a ton of fun. You won't work that alone. You'll work that with an experienced master gardener for a while, and that's a piece of cake because they're right there, and then you get the hang of answering those questions. Not like you don't know anything anyway. You're here because you already had a great bit of knowledge, right, and interest. But the funnest way for me, to do this extension is when I get to do it in more depth, and that is Speakers Bureau. I go out, several of us go out to the libraries, to the, these are interesting, to the garden clubs, and to, I'm missing one liaison, the libraries. The garden centers, that's right, the garden centers. Doug Roach is the liaison for the garden centers. I'm doing the libraries right now, looking for someone to help with that. And Jean Arntz is doing the garden clubs. So this is anywhere from a half hour to an hour that we get to talk about what the subject is that they wanted or that we have on hand for you to give. And when I say that, I mean on the intranet, you will find a Speakers Bureau page. There are people's talks that they have already given on that page. Some of them have notes with their slides. Some of them have slides with their notes. I found one talk that was over 100 slides. You're not doing it. You're not doing it. So what I'm doing, what I'm in the process of doing, is writing the presentation and giving you the slides to work with. We give those presentations in two different ways. In person, as the virus allows us, and over this past year, mostly virtually. So it does come in handy if you know how to use Zoom and you know how to share your screen. You'll have everything you need to give a presentation. Lastly, sometime this spring, as the virus allows, I would like to have a trained speaker, you know, hour and a half little gig where I show you how it works. We talk a little bit about presentation based on research that is in corporations long before this. I was trained for the United States of the Girl Scouts of America by a fabulous firm out of New York. You know, this is all the hints that you need to be successful. It's not as scary as you think to talk. When we say we're going to give these presentations, I'm talking to generally a dozen people at the most. Larger groups, it's not usually that. If it's a garden center, sometimes it's only 6 people. It doesn't matter, we love to share this information. Your passion, your enthusiasm for what you do carries into that, and you know more than the general public. And so it's our job to go ahead and extend that knowledge, since you are now going to be members of the extension volunteers. It's our job to extend that. So I hope that you'll join me, hopefully in the spring, as we get to have that little gig, and on the Speakers Bureau. If you have any questions, please let me know. Now is good. Yes, ma'am?
Would you give us your name again, please?
Monica, M-O-N-I-C-A, Menzie, M-E-N-S-E, Menzie. Let's make it hard. You can write it phonetically, that'll serve you, right?
And do you have an email, phone number, how do you want to contact?
You will get all of that as we make a general announcement to the membership that we would like for you to come to this if you're interested in being a presenter.
And I can include contacts for everyone you hear today in today's email.
And you're going to find every committee head on the intranet. The more that you guys, this whole class, it's not like anything I've ever experienced. You got to college and for some reason I didn't feel as overwhelmed. Of course, I didn't walk into college thinking I knew anything. I walked in here thinking I knew something, then I found out I knew. So there's a whole lot more, right? Which is also good to remember. We point to the resources. You get to be an expert in a few things, and then you hang out with some other people who are experts in other things, and it just comes together. So hang in there. Once you fool around on the intranet for a while, you'll know more than you need to know. Anybody else? Thank you for letting me take your time, and I hope to see you all again. Thank you. Most welcome.
Monica's class of 2019, so something to aspire to.
Yes.
All right. Last but certainly not least, Barbara Tyson and Tracy Lee. They are the ones that, actually did all of this.
Well, you've seen us around the class. You haven't seen us as often as you might have the past classes. Usually, one of the two of us is at each one of the classes. But again, because of the pandemic, we had to manage the number of people who could come into the class. So you do see at least 2 master gardeners sitting over there doing whatever, as well as enjoying the lectures, because that's a great way to learn more or refresh what you learned in the class that you took. Bev is back there. She's one of the members of the initial training committee as well. There are 10 master gardeners in the committee. We also have Ashley and Hannah. So it's a fairly large committee, but at the same time, let me give you an idea of what we do. Next month, we're going to be meeting. That's just right after this class, right? What are we going to do? We're going to be debriefing, thinking about what went well, what could we change, what do we want to get rid of, and start planning the next class, because we have to. The next class starts in January of 2023. Wow. And we need to be ready for that. What do we need to do before that? Well, we need to get the word out that the class is going to happen. So we need to advertise, get people excited about it, and get people to sign up for the information sessions, which have to happen. Okay? Then we get the applications. We look at the different components of the class. The IT committee works on the quizzes, those lovely quizzes. The final project. And the other kinds of things that we do is, as I said, we're in the classroom and we're doing things like helping Ashley. I don't know if you noticed, but I was out there putting chairs back there this morning, and helping with the setup, helping with keeping track of the attendance, helping with keeping track of how you're doing in the class. So the other thing that I wanted to express, sort of like what Monica talked about, is that it's one of those committees where you don't have to be someplace specifically. We have people who, like Tracy Lee, works full-time. And so it gives you an opportunity to be able to put in volunteer hours without being face-to-face. Okay, Tracy Lee.
What's the name of your committee?
It's the initial training committee.
Okay, thank you.
So as Barbara mentioned, at the end of each initial training class, we do an analysis and a debrief and thinking about what works and what doesn't work. And within our committee, we have lots of subcommittees that do little projects and things like that. And so we review the processes that took place this year. This year was very different for us because we had to make changes because of the pandemic. This is not the typical way that we run the class, but I think it turned out well. We had to make some adjustments for that. So that will be analyzed at the end of the class. And we're going to take feedback, all those feedback forms that we gave you. We're going to take that into consideration, also how the committee felt about how the class went. how Ashley's input is very, very important as well. And it's just in an effort to improve the class for the next group of students that are coming in. So we have a few things that Beverly and I talked about that we might want to revise and potentially change for the next year. So if you're interested in this committee, you know, there's the little subcommittees that you can be a part of. And so one is the final project. That needs to be updated, and it hasn't been updated since I left doing it. So it's like 5 years ago since I retired doing that.
Little tweaks, but not
Little
much.
tweaks, but it probably needs to be overhauled by now, and you know, revise the process and probably consider some electronic submissions. I think this year has proved that we can be successful doing that. So that's one project that we need to look at. And then quizzes. Quizzes are updated every time we have a new class because we rotate topics that we use and we teach. And so making it also clearer to people and also maybe doing it electronically as well. So that's something to consider. And then the topics. We choose topics. We don't teach the same thing every year. There's core classes that we keep, but we might swap in and out some topics that are of interest to people that we want to share with you. And we also found out that some topics don't need a full day. So we have more room for field trips. So that's something that we want to revise as well. And then the last one is, let me see if I can, the last one is improve and review the process for you giving us feedback on a regular basis. And so we're doing the paper copies now. We're trying to see if we can do that maybe electronically. So if you have any interest in that or any of these revisions in the committee, we welcome you. We'd love to hear your input. And since you guys have been through it, the most recent group, we would love for you to come join us. There's room for everyone, and there's always a little project to be done. I think that's it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, you guys are absolutely the most helpful when it comes to initial training because you've been through it most recently. So seriously consider that. Even if you just have thoughts, we would love to hear them, right? If something occurs to you after you hand in your form, we would love to hear it. I mentioned this in yesterday's email, but I will be sending out kind of a more, you might get to see your first extensionees type survey, right? Where we have this kind of formal extension process for how we do surveys. You'll be getting that within a week or two. And one of the things we're actually really interested in figuring out is how you guys all heard about us. This class is, in every way that we know of, kind of the most diverse class we've had. And I'm very legitimately curious how that happened, right? Because we kind of did the same thing. The world obviously was shifting around us. And something happened where all of a sudden we were able to get people from all sorts of different backgrounds, different age groups, different everything, right? And that's just not something we've always had happen. So that's one question that especially you will see crop up where I'm just like, how did this happen? How did you find us? Why did you want to, I just want to understand the logic of kind of how that works. So, awesome. Okay. Last one of these. Whew, we're going to do it though. Okay. So, this is something I was kind of thinking about too while Donna was talking, is that, and I'm going to kind of try and be shouty today because I have my mask on, but if my voice drops, let me know, okay? Is that when Donna comes, what that shows you is that you're a Master Gardener, but Master Gardeners are part of a broader county system, right? We're doing family and consumer sciences here, we're doing nutrition education, we're doing welcome baby, we're giving out diapers, right? We're doing all of 4-H, all of that out of this office. What's kind of cool about this talk, actually, is that this was developed by Matt Jones. You might remember him, he taught pathology. This was a talk I pulled off of the state side of the intranet. There's a talk for every single one of these presentations if you want to use it, because this is a larger state system too, right? So you might be receiving the same training for any given class that everyone across the state is, and you're using a textbook that everyone across the state is doing, which I just think is a cool thing to keep in mind, because it's very easy to feel like I'm a Durham Master Gardener, and you're like, no, you're part of Durham County Extension, and you're part of state Master Gardener program, right? You're part of all these things, and we can get resources from all these different levels, right? That's actually why this is so cool. We have all these really broad resources. So just something to keep in mind kind of as you're moving forward. All right, diagnostics. This is the kind of class that brings it all together. So diagnosis is terrifying for most people, right? Working the hotline, working the office. Worst case scenario is someone coming up to you and bringing you a leaf, being like, what happened? You're like, oh God. I think it's deciduous. Okay, good. So don't worry. The whole thing, hopefully if you have learned nothing throughout this class, it is that you can take a minute, take a breath, get their contact information and contact them back, right? You never have to answer anything on the spot, not ever. I don't know, I'll look it up is a beautiful answer, right? That is a great answer. And it might take you time to look it up, and you might look at it for a while and go, I can't make heads or tails of this. I'm gonna call Ashley, I'm gonna email Ashley because Ashley's bad about her phone. And that's completely valid, right? That is a good way to go about this. And you will learn more as you go, and you will understand it. You will be able to diagnose things more quickly as you go because you've seen things before. So what makes diagnosis difficult? Part of it is that just this sort of damage, for example, on canna lilies, this is Japanese beetles. This could be a million different things, right? Without seeing the Japanese beetle on it, it can be very hard to know what caused that. It might be somewhat new disease. Some of us might know what this is already, but it's roses with kind of very awkward, clumpy thorns, prickles, right? You might know that that's rosette disease, but that was a new disease at some point, right? That not all of us had seen. And so that can be really, really difficult too. It might just be something you've never seen before, and if you don't know what a normal prickle pattern on a rose looks like, how would you know that was abnormal?
Is that picture upside down by any chance?
I think this is the root clump up here, and they've taken the plant and they've laid it on its side.
Oh, I
So
see.
it could be upside down, but, dealer's choice. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm barely learning up from down.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Laid on its side. So, where to begin? First off, just make sure you're taking kind of a deliberate approach, right? Work through a set number of questions that we're going to go through. The book outlines this as an easy 10-step process, which I find hilarious because no 10-step process sounds easy to me. It's fine, we'll work through it. And try several methods. So one of the things that can be really helpful is that I find that Googling things using very basic terms is actually more helpful than Googling things using fancy botanical terms. And that's because everybody else on the internet doesn't know fancy botanical terms, but they might have found the answer, right? And so I tend to do things like, canna lily chewing damage, right? Not like canna lily skeletonized, blah, 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 right? And so just using kind of the more basic terms is often very helpful because it just tends to work better. So for the diagnostic process, this is covered in your book. So in 10 easy steps, I'm gonna kind of clump them into what I think of as like major questions you should be asking. And we'll work through some of these kind of in real time. So first three, identify the plant, describe the problem, what's normal. Okay? These are all what's going on questions, right? What is normal is essential to understand because if people bring in things with discoloration, with weird spots, with a weird growth habit, if you had never seen a contorted hazelnut before and someone showed you this weird little tree shrub thing that was kind of like doing this, you'd be like, oh my God, like call USDA, like I don't understand what's going on here, like we have found something new, right? But for contorted hazelnut, that's completely standard, right? And so you need to know kind of what's normal. Some of the things that can be very, very weird and strange looking but are normal. Red, yellow, bright green, purple colors. White splotches that are regular, right? That's just a variegated plant. Really distorted growth, weeping growth, all of these things, right, are things that, especially on trees and shrubs, might just be a property of that plant, right? It might be what it was selected for, and that person forgot what the variety was, and now they think something terrible is happening. Once you've identified that it is abnormal for that plant, right, you'll want to know the cultural practices and environmental conditions. So how is this plant growing? Is the site wet? Is it dry? Has it changed recently? Right? Sometimes it's a good question to know, did you spray something recently? Did you do something recently? Was there construction nearby recently? Recent construction can change water flow patterns, right? So maybe something that used to be dry is now drowning. Maybe something that used to have a lot of water is now dry. right? So these are what I like to think of as helpful questions, but also really good stalling questions, right? So you'll kind of be standing there and you're kind of going, you know, has there been construction? Has a tree been chopped down? Or is there more sun or more shade than there used to be, right? All of these sort of things. Ask about changes that have happened. And the change could have happened for something like a tree or shrub 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? You might just be seeing that now. Look for signs and symptoms of pests and pathogens, and we'll cover that again a little bit. So kind of, you know, am I seeing a straight up Japanese beetle? Am I seeing caterpillar poop, frass? Am I seeing chewing damage? Am I seeing piercing, sucking damage, right? Am I seeing any of those things on the plant? And finally, these are kind of timing and distribution questions, right? So distribution in the landscape. I got a question recently from someone who said, I'm getting a lot of mold on my plants. You know, you ask more, I'm getting a lot of mold on my plants and I have a lot of mushrooms in my yard. I think it's a fungal problem. Well, you have mushrooms, and then you have mold on your azaleas, zinnias, and tomatoes, right? Is the same disease going to affect probably azaleas, zinnias, and tomatoes? No, right? Diseases are very specific. Those are not related plants. The mushrooms she's pulling out of the yard are not the disease that would cause the mold, right? Or not the fungus that would cause the mold either. So what do I actually think is going on? Moisture, right? There's a water problem. Why are all of these different funguses happy all of a sudden? Moisture, right? So thinking about the distribution of the landscape, distribution of damage on the plant. So is it, I don't know if it's exactly what we were looking at, but we were looking at some damage on a tree that Jeff had, and it's all kind of right around this sort of height, and it's a tearing, ripping damage, right? What could that be? Right. If it's this high, that's above the graze line, right? That's not common for a deer. If you walk through a forest and everything is perfectly clear and beautiful up until here, and then you have a lot of leaves above, there are a lot of deer in that forest, right? They have a graze line. So it's kind of understanding where things happen on the plant too. Finally, timing. So if I'm looking at a fungal problem, did it happen in the spring when it was kind of cool and moist? Did it happen in late summer when it was very hot and humid? Right, those are going to be different fungus, right? So, I mean, even like on tomato, you have early blight and late blight. Guess which one comes first, typically, right? So, it's very, very helpful to kind of ask some of these questions. And in the same way that these cultural practice and environmental questions are great stalling questions, these are excellent stalling questions too, if you're just trying to find your footing, right? Because I know that even to this day, when someone hands me something I've never seen before, I start going through, like, right away I started asking you, when does it show up? Where does it show up? How did it happen, right? And it's gathering more information as it's giving me time to process what I'm looking at, right? Most of us tend to get very nervous when we get quiet, right? Like if you're sitting there looking at something and you're not saying anything, a lot of us feel a lot of anxiety about that moment. So asking these sort of questions gives you information while allowing you to kind of like soothe yourself, is what I find. I'm just going to be real, right? Like this can be a nerve-wracking process. It's helpful to have some tips and tricks. So for number 1, identifying the affected plants. Client may be wrong. I think that should be the first bullet point. Client may be wrong. Okay? If you don't know a plant that they're telling you that this is, take a minute, Google that plant. Make sure it looks like what they're showing you. Okay? Different species are susceptible to different diseases and disorders under different conditions, right? That's why this really, really matters. Just like that fungal issue in the person's yard. If she told me she had downy or powdery mildew on something like a Monarda, a bee balm, or she had it on a tomato, they're different diseases. I might treat them similarly, but they're different, right? Because they're on different species. And disease susceptibility can vary even among cultivars. And so this becomes especially important when you're thinking about some of the vegetables, because especially things like tomatoes are bred for different kind of like disease resistances. And so it can be helpful to know, if they know what cultivar, what it is, because you can just Google it real fast, pull up what it should be resistant to, and you kind of rule those things out typically. even just knowing whether it was a hybrid or an heirloom. The heirloom tomatoes are just, they do their best. That's all we can really say about them. They try really hard, but that's about the best they can do. The hybrids are actually resistant. When you're thinking about where does the problem occur on the plant, is it leaves, stems, where specifically, right? So for a lot of our nutrient deficiencies, if you guys remember this from soils, the different deficiencies show up at different parts of the leaf, right? Some will be on the margins, some will be in the veins, some will be on top leaves, some will be on lower leaves. And they're just extremely like, they will show up one way, right? So understanding kind of where the distribution is on the plant is extremely helpful. Gather all your details. And something I never appreciated a doctor doing until I did it to someone when I was trying to diagnose plant problems is it's okay to circle back around and ask a question again a different way, right? Because people either sometimes aren't thinking about it 100% when you ask them the question. In some scenarios, if it's like herbicide damage, they might even be trying to like obfuscate, right? Like a lot of people don't want to admit that they might have been the one who damaged the plant, so sometimes you'll kind of have to like circle back around a couple times. And that's okay, right? To say, where is it? Is it on the leaves? Or is it anywhere else? Is it on the stems? What part of the leaves is it on? I'm going to sprinkle those questions throughout. And they're kind of the same question over and over again, but they're approaching it from different angles, right? And you can get kind of different information that way. Normal can look abnormal. This is a really, really great example. So this is a honey locust that is a sunburst cultivar, right? That thing is like that more often than not, right? It is bright yellow, and I would be worried that tree was stressed if I didn't know it was a yellow cultivar, right? Fern sori, right? These are the spore-bearing structures on a fern. If you turned over a fern leaf and you hadn't seen that before, you'd be like, oh my god, what's going on with my fern, right? They look like they could be some sort of fungal infection, something else. Part of what tells me that this is not probably abnormal, what would tell you guys that this was not abnormal? Uniform. Okay, I heard the word uniform a couple times. Mumblings of the crowd. I like it. Right, it's very, very uniform. It's very regular. It's very tidy, right? That tells me that this is probably something else. Cultural factors. Obviously, we can have problems at planting. I believe Paul McKenzie, who did IPM, might have mentioned his theory is that if a tree or shrub fails in the first 3 to 5 years, it's typically a planting problem. And the more I think about that, the more I think it's right. It might have been the wrong spot. It might be girdled. It might be something, but it was something that happened in the initial choosing and planting of the plant, right? And it took it down over time. So planting is a huge time to get things right. Staking damage can be things like if this is too tight, it'll start wearing things out in here. You can cause breaking. You can cause all sorts of other problems, kind of damage to the plant. And so you'll see this sort of damage right around that kind of spot. Pruning, obviously, can cause massive damage if you don't do it right. This time of year is a really, for example, bad time to prune because you might encourage a flush of new growth. That's just wasted energy. The plant put out all these new leaves because it's just warm enough to be tantalizing, but not warm enough to actually do anything with it. Right? Worst case scenario pruning, right, ends up looking like this. Right? We're thinking about topping, any of these sort of really aggressive pruning techniques, and so you can end up with really weird growth forms because something was pruned poorly in the past. So this is kind of that timing aspect too, right? When did this happen? Fertility management. One thing, if you are out with an experienced master gardener, you will always hear them ask, almost question number 1. Have you had a soil test done recently? Have you had a soil test done recently?
A soil.
Yep, right? Fertility is actually pretty hard to diagnose because it can overlap with a lot of other things. The symptoms can. But if I have that soil test, I can at least set that aside, right? If your soil nutrients look good, if that stuff all looks good, I can set it aside, and it's just a way more rigorous way than me eyeballing it and hoping I'm picking the right type of chlorosis, right, that this thing's exhibiting. Mechanical damage. If you ever tie a plant something up with harder than the plant itself, it will cause damage eventually. Right? This is why we don't like using things like fishing line, chain, any of these hard things, right? Like they're just gonna cut the plant. Like the plant can't beat that. Pesticide and herbicide misapplication, and finally water management, right? This is like one that's increasingly a big deal for us with climate change, just because like we have the same amount of water, but it's way more erratic. And so this is one that will become more and more of a problem. And oftentimes, like, folks just don't realize how long they have to water things to get them established, right? That first year is critical for a tree or shrub, the first 5. I'd be keeping an eye on something really carefully. And even then, if it gets dry enough for long enough, I'm watering everything. It doesn't matter how long it's been in. Some of the environmental causal factors you might see: temperature fluctuations, temperature extremes. I had a master gardener from the 2019 class who had a beautiful Edgeworthia shrub, right? A big, beautiful paper bush. You guys might have seen these. They have these kind of cool tropical style leaves. They're really pretty. And all of the leaves that came out first were contorted and gnarly looking. And I told him what I thought it was, because the exact same thing happened to mine. Okay. Anyone have any guesses? So it happened to 2 plants in different locations, and it happened early in the season. Frost damage. The earliest first leaves came out. There was a cold snap. They got messed up when they were small, and so when they tried to enlarge, they were never going to look right. All the leaves that came out after that looked great, right? So just thinking through the timing, right? When did this happen? Well, it happened basically very, very early in the season. It could have been cold, right? Sunlight, soil compaction, we know this is a really, really big one. I love this random acts of nature. Sometimes weird stuff happens, like welcome to biology, right? And then heavy rains and floods. These can cause, heavy rains and floods especially can cause drowning. So typically, for example, if we have a really, really wet season, like a very wet season or 2, the following year, we will have tree deaths. Those trees drowned during the wet season, and it was about a year later that you saw them finally exhaust their resources. That's a really helpful thing to think about with plants too, is based on their size. Bigger plants have more resources, and they can take longer to die, right? But that thing that killed them might have happened here, right? It might have happened here in the past. Fun insect and pathology review, signs versus symptoms, right? Sign is the physical evidence of a pathogen, whereas a symptom is the growth or physiological effect caused by a pathogen, right? So we're looking at, Matt is the best, and he gives you little cheat sheets over here. I know it's a gall, I don't know what the top one is. Frass. Frass, it's just straight up insect poop. All right. So this is frass from an insect, right? That's an actual thing from an insect that's left behind. It's like exoskeletons, the insect itself, right? Whereas the gall is kind of the distorted growth caused by an insect, or typically some sort of fly or midge causing that growth, right? Both of these are insect damage, though. Insects can cause damage through feeding, nesting and egg laying, and spreading diseases, all sorts of different ways. Remember, I think especially for insects, it's really, really helpful to know things like caterpillars cause chewing damage, right? Aphids will cause stippling damage or distorted growth. Beetles typically cause chewing damage. The reason that's really helpful is because if you have a plant that's got a bunch of chewing damage, you can at least narrow it down. Okay, it's probably something like a caterpillar or a beetle, maybe a grasshopper or something in that family. If I see something with a bunch of stippling damage, I'm not going to apply a product or take an intervention step for caterpillars, right? It's not caterpillars. It's probably something like an aphid or something related, right? So it's just really helpful to know. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he told me something really interesting once, which was that for a doctor, they don't always have to know what's wrong with you. If they can't know what's wrong with you, they at least want to know how to help you, right? And it can be really frustrating to not know what's wrong with you, but at some point you do want your doctor to set that aside and be like, okay, I will come back to that. How do I help you in this moment, right? And so the same things for plants. Maybe you don't know the exact insect or the exact disease, but you at least know the type of thing it is and how you can help, right? Stippling we've seen before, right? This is something like you especially see as on azaleas from azalea lacebug. Pieces missing or tunneling, right? This comes from a lot of those leaf miners, those insects that like to get into that middle spot and cause those little tunnels. Okay. Ooh, this is fun. It's freezing. Okay. All right, so types of pathogens. Does anyone remember what the most common was? Like 80% of cases. 80% of cases, there's a fungus among us. Yeah, absolutely. These are much less common. So like if I have to default in my guess, my default guess is fungus. Unless I have really compelling evidence. Viral diseases are actually quite uncommon. Rose rosette is viral. It's like one of like 3 or 4 I can name off the top of my head that like I actually would see, right? Like in general, it's fungus, which is actually very, very helpful because fungal diseases especially are favored by poor airflow and wet conditions. So typically if I see a disease and I don't know what it is, I'm like, okay, remove the damaged tissue, increase airflow, try to decrease moisture, right? In general, that will get me somewhere at least, right? Some of the signs you might see of these pathogens, all of these could be fungal actually. Ooze and slime sometimes is bacterial, but certainly can be fungal. So most of what you're gonna see even is fungal. And one thing I'll take note of is like fruiting bodies, so seeing the actual mushroom. There's one lawn disease, I forget which one it is, that causes a fungal body like that. Most things you will not see on mushroom. So if you see a mushroom, that's an entirely separate issue, right? Like that is typically like not related to what you were seeing on the plant, right? It's just a mushroom doing mushroom things on its own time, right? They're separate issues. So just be aware of that. It can mean moisture, but it doesn't mean disease. Some of the symptoms of pathogens you might see be things like blight. Blight is typically really what they're talking about when they talk about something like fire blight on apples, is it's kind of a dieback right at the tips. It's like a dramatic dieback right at the tips, and there can be a canker down below. Cankers broadly, right, these are often in response to a mechanical stress, right? Something like hit that thing, and then a disease came in, right? Something opened up a big wound, a disease came in, and it grew to try and heal basically around that. Wilt, I love plant pathologists because wilt is in fact just wilt. Like that's both the name and the symptom, right? Very easy. Spots that you might see, and then mottle or mosaic. Mottle or mosaic, this is one of the only ones you might see that can be viral. But typically, like all of these other ones would be fungal or bacterial. Also see rot, stunting, and dieback. And those are typically from root problems. All right, so the major causal factors of plant problems, you have cultural and environmental, and pests and pathogens. So how would you get, like, I always hate when teachers used to ask questions where you were like, I know you know the answer and you're just asking me to read your mind, which I'm not good at. Okay, so which one's abiotic? Awesome. High energy today, I like it. Okay, what's biotic? Right, so that's pests and pathogens, right? And it's really helpful to know. It's actually really, really helpful to separate those out because whether you have an abiotic or a biotic problem is very, very, like, you've basically separated the world into two halves, right? Is it something that is going on with how the plant is growing, or is it something that came in and is affecting the plant, like a disease or a pathogen? And there are major differences in how they show up on plants. So if we're thinking about biotic versus abiotic causes and what the symptoms look like, biotic will typically be randomly distributed, right? So biotic will be something like maybe it's a spore blown in by the wind, or it was birds flying overhead and dropping something, right? So it'll be kind of random. Whereas abiotic tends to be pretty uniform. I think we saw a picture in one of our talks where someone showed herbicide damage, right, on a lawn. And like, there was a line down the lawn, and on one side it was yellow and on the other side it was healthy, but it was a line, right? The moment I see that straight line, I'm like, something happened here that's abiotic, right? Something happened here that was not a disease or a pathogen or something like that, right? So the moment you see really clear lines, really even distribution, that was probably us, right? Like that was probably a human did something. Biotic causes tend to have hotspots and edges and they're diffuse, right? So that'll be something like if you think about a fungal spot on a lawn, right? It'll be kind of round, but it'll be a little bit wavy, and it'll be the worst in the middle, and it'll have an edge that's moving, right? Like it'll have all these kind of things. Whereas if it's abiotic, it tends to be very linear or geometric. Anytime I see a straight line, or a straight, like a hard corner, or a perfect circle, right, I start thinking abiotic. Just like we were talking about with the mushrooms, azaleas, zinnias, and tomatoes. Abiotic, non-host specific. Most of our diseases, even when you think about things like Phytophthora, which are these diseases it's a disease that can impact many, many things, there are actually different subspecies and like sub-races of Phytophthora. So it's not terribly common that it would jump across a whole bunch of things. Not to say it can't, but like, right, it's just like the diseases we get, right, where it can jump between us, but it's actually pretty hard for it to jump to other species. That's kind of a big deal when something jumps to a different species. So different effects among species or microclimates possible. So maybe the plants in the front yard, right, the daylilies in the front yard are doing beautifully, but the ones in the backyard that are in shade are doing really poorly, and it looks like a disease is coming on. Right, sudden death or decline tends to be abiotic as well. Typically sudden death or decline, when I've seen it, it's a water change or a light change, right? So there was construction, there were drainage changes, there were trees taken down, there was something like that, right, that really kind of shifted everything and the plant couldn't survive anymore. Biotic tends to be season specific. Abiotic, right, like human error, no season, right? Like we will take a plant down at any time. And biotic causes will worsen with time, whereas abiotic causes will appear suddenly and typically not get worse, right? Because if you spilled that herbicide once, it's not going to progress much beyond that. It's like you did all the damage once and then it's going to move on, right? So some of the distribution patterns on plants. Make sure you examine all parts of the plant. Again, don't take the client's word for it. If they say no, it's only on the leaves, I still like to get a picture of the stems, and I still like to ask them if the roots are wet, because it's just worth asking. Look for patterns on individual organs, and by organs they typically mean things like leaves or stems. Especially on leaves, it's helpful to know, so is it always in between the veins, or sometimes does it jump the veins? Is it always on the outside of the leaf, or is it always on the inside of the leaf, right? Just kind of knowing kind of where it's happening on the leaf is really, really helpful. And a lot of times it'll be pretty diagnostic, especially if it's a disease or a disorder. Is there uniformity? Do you see a bullseye pattern? I think it's oaks that get these really, really dramatic oak galls that are like perfect bullseyes that are really, really cool. Actually, like when you see one, you'll like stop and you're like, oh my God, it's actually cool. So it's really helpful to kind of see the patterns in some of these diseases. And they often have organ-specific names, which again, like plant pathologists are the best, right? So a lot of times you will hear of things like leaf gall. That is a gall that occurs on leaves. Stem canker, a canker that occurs on stems, right? So it's really, really helpful. A lot of times the names are fairly straightforward. It's one of the reasons I like using super basic terms when I Google too, because if I'm like, there's a gall on a leaf, sometimes I'll just be like, all right, oak leaf gall. And a picture exactly like what I'm looking at will come up, right? And it's just like, okay, cool, yeah, that's it, got it, right? Nothing too fancy there. And then finally, review timing. So when did the symptoms appear, kind of what season? Within a season, I like to think about what temperature and whether there was a lot of moisture or dry period that I knew about recently. Are multiple plants affected? And is it progressing? So are more plant parts becoming affected? So kind of how is it kind of working through time? Okay. So this is very straightforward. I think the last one is actually probably the best one. Form the best hypothesis. I like to think of it, for the perfectionists out there, it can be form a good hypothesis. This is as much an art as it is a science. Plants are even worse patients than people because they can't even talk, right? Like, we're looking at things and we're like, I don't know, I think this is what's happening. And if someone doesn't want to dig up the plant, I can't look at the roots, I can't tell if there's root rot, I can't tell any of these other things. So going back to this idea of the doctor doesn't always have to know exactly what it is, sometimes they want to know how to help. If you have a plant that comes in and you research and research and research and you say, okay, well, I think I know what the plant is, and I think this is probably fungal based on the spots and based on the fact that most things are fungal. I might not be able to tell you the exact fungus it is, but what I can tell you, right, and this is stuff we all learned in this class, remove dead or damaged tissue, right, prune that thing back to healthy tissue, improve airflow if you can. When you're pruning, prune it to open it up, right, to get that airflow through that plant a little bit better. If you notice that there are big problems with water, see if you can do anything to divert water from that spot or kind of like get it back to the way it used to be. If it's an annual, can you do raised beds? Can you plant it higher next time? Right, so these are things where I didn't need to know what fungus it was, but I knew that water made it worse, and I knew that like having dead tissue on you never makes it better, right? So these are kind of basic tips I can always give. A lot of what you end up saying to people will be things like remove dead or damaged tissue, increase airflow, have you done a soil test, right? And just like what Monica was saying, you don't have to be the absolute expert, but even that is very, very helpful information for most people. Like, most people don't even know that, and even that's great. Okay, so it's gone beyond this. Plant samples need to be collected, right? We need to actually figure out what's going on. This is a prize-winning plum plant, plum tree or something, right? This is a beloved plant that we actually really need to figure out what's going on. So, plant samples. If it's a plant sample, fresh, healthy, and unhealthy tissue, it is extremely helpful, especially if you don't know what it is, to have healthy tissue, because then I can say, what does normal look like, right? And then leaves still attached to stems. If we're going to submit a plant to the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic, if we can, we submit the whole plant. We dig that thing up, root ball and all, hope it fits in the car, and drive it over there, right? So the more tissue you can get, the better. So I had a couple of samples that were brought in today. We're going to talk about some of them. I'm going to put them to you guys. These two samples, if I didn't know what the plant was, it's fungal, and that's about all I've got, right? If I don't know what the plant is, these are actually really hard, and we can pass them around. This one I would leave in its plastic, because they're a little bit hard to tell. But so, however, I'll pass that one around first. The moment I know what this plant is, and it was quince? Yeah. So quince is, so it's a weird kind of gnarly looking growth, and we'll pass it around. Quince is related to apple. Do we have any guesses? This is fun. The most Dr. Seussian of all the fungal diseases? Cedar apple rust, right? That is an old structure off of cedar apple rust. I will
Slow down a little bit. They're applets.
Cedar apple rust.
Apple rust. Gotcha.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, what that thing looks like when it was in its full glory, right? Crazy orange, like tentacly structure, right? Like super cool, and that's the dried husk of it. So for example, we have a serviceberry, an amelanchier out front, that also gets a version of cedar apple rust. And its berries get those crazy tentacles. So one of the great things about rusts, if you haven't seen them before, is that they tend to all be orange. If you see a bright orange, rusty looking growth, it's typically rust, right? Like again, plant pathologists are awesome and like do half of our job for us. So that's one that if I know it's on quince, and I know it's got a weird fungal growth, cedar apple rust. The interesting thing about this disease, or about this pathogen, cedar apple rust, is that it has to have both cedar and apples nearby. And it does its crazy fruiting structure on the apple, the quince, the serviceberry, and it does an alternate structure that's not nearly as dramatic on cedar, juniper, those sorts of plants. To the point where it used to be historically that if people had really high value apple orchards, they would basically try to kill all the cedars in a certain area, because if you could prevent one of the hosts, you could protect the apples.
I think the orchard guy said that.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, it's a really like weird one. So the other one we passed around looks very similar in some ways, right? It's kind of a weird, gnarly, dark growth. It's the one in the plastic. And that was on plum.
Also cherries.
Yeah. Yeah, so that one's on plum, and it looks superficially similar. Cedar apple rust is not a problem, really, unless you're like a crazy high-end orchard person. Then it's a big problem. But if you're just someone, like I watch that serviceberry every year get cedar apple rust, and I go out and I look at it and I think it looks cool, and then I wander back inside, right? Like this is the extent of my interaction with it. The plum, that is black knot fungus. That will kill that plant over time. That is one of the few diseases that you'll see come in, and it looks just like that on plum whenever you see it. That like the moment you gave it to me and you said it was on a plum, I like put my hand on her shoulder and I was like, I'm sorry. Like I go into like hospice nurse mode, where I'm like, how much do you love this plant? How much are you willing to care for it? You know, we get to start talking about how sometimes if you have 3 plums, you'll want to take out that diseased ones and start monitoring the other ones, and you can cut all that damage back, but it's very hard to ever get rid of it. I'll start talking to you about if you have a plant that's diseased and there are no other plums in your area, maybe you're just with that plum to the end and you shepherd it into that good night, right? Like it's a much more dramatic thing to find. So, and it's really, really helpful, right? So if you came in and you told me that was an apple, it doesn't actually look quite right for cedar apple rust, but I would give you a really different answer. And so it's worth kind of following up to make sure what she's telling me is right even about the species. So, but those are both kind of dried fungal forms, right? So they can look really different from how they look when they're fresh, but when they're dried, they still look like a really kind of weird, lumpy structure, right? Just to drive this home and make it extra confusing. If you see a weird, lumpy structure, doesn't always have to be a fungus. So make sure you know what's normal for that plant. We have an elm in this area called a winged elm that always has funny little protuberances off its stem, off its branches. So know what's normal, know what you're looking at, know if it's abnormal.
For the plum one, is there like a, can you Google what the fresh?
Yeah, it looks pretty similar.
Oh, okay.
No, but like it's a good impulse. Yes, you can always Google.
And can you show us the winged elm real quick too?
So what she showed was actually pretty low key. I mean, it gets straight up disgusting, right? Like if you looked at that on a plant, you'd be like, it's not good. Like I don't know what it is, but it's not good, right? And plums right now when their leaves are off, it's a really good time to scout a plum. Just go and look up in it. And if you don't see too much of it, you can prune it out, but it's gonna spread. Like it's gonna spread. And so just for comparison, what looks normal, a winged elm, all of the branches, if I look up in the tree, have these funny, thin little protuberances off of them, the wings. Right, so if I were to go and look up at a winged elm, I would look up and I would see all these weird, especially like against the sky, right? It's hard to see. So you'll see all these kind of funny structures. So you need to start, okay, it's an elm, what am I doing? Yeah.
Are there plum cultivars that are resistant to that? So in other words, you may say, sorry about that, but
Yes.
it's gonna go out. Yeah, but they want to have another plum. You know, I like a plum, what would you direct them to do?
This is a great question. So if I have a spot that has this disease, can I plant another resistant plum? I believe that Auburn University has created some plums that might have resistance to that. They're kind of new plums. They're called the Auburn plums. I would have to look that up specifically if they have resistance to that. However, I would be more inclined to plant an Auburn plum in a site that had never had black knot. Once the site has it, I might be seeing if there was any other fruit you really liked. Right? You know, because it's just like a vaccine or anything else like that, where it's effective, but it's not 100%, right? I mean, if your heart was set on it, I'd be like, you do you. I mean, it's your garden, it's one plum, but whatever. I mean.
So this is a fungus in the soil, then, or?
I know it does stay in the soil. I don't know how it comes in. Yeah. But I know it stays in the soil because, like, when now all that drops, like, you have to be really meticulous about cleaning them up. You have to do all that stuff. But I bet it's spread some other way. You know what I mean? Like the initial infection. I'd have to look it up, to be totally honest. Okay. All right, so for insect samples, if you're going to submit insect samples, in a perfect world, mature and immature forms, right? Both adults and larvae, but adults are always more useful than larvae. When people submit larvae, I'm always like, looks like a grub, you know, like, I don't know, it's fat and it's white. I don't know what to tell you. So mature forms especially, if they're delicate, glass jar with rubbing alcohol is really, really great. You can also freeze them. That's really useful. And it's always great to include also a picture of evidence of damage to the plant.
What does the rubbing alcohol do?
It preserves them. Yeah, so it's helpful because, like, so if you were to submit a bunch of ants in a bag, they'll dry up and over time they'll kind of crinkle and crumple and they'll fall apart in that bag. Whereas if you put them in rubbing alcohol and brought that vial in, I can pull them out, and we have a scope in the office and we have one upstairs too, and it's easier for me to see the structures because it hasn't all, like, you know, that. Evidence of damage to the plant, this is always my best case scenario, is when someone brings an insect in and then they have a picture of, like, what it's been doing to their plant too, right? Because that really, really helps me figure it out. Again, don't always assume that if there's damage on a plant and someone brings you an insect, that the insect did the damage to the plant, right? They might be totally separate issues. I feel that insects are often guilty by association, but they didn't do it themselves, right? Like, they were hanging out at a crime scene and everyone now thinks they were the culprit. This is a great picture of photos. We really get photos like this. You're like, I'm gonna need you to try again. So if you can't bring in a sample, the photo should include healthy and unhealthy parts. I really, really like it. So this is great if you're trying to talk to a client. Client calls and says, what's going on? You say, hey, can you send me some photos? If you just let them, like, go off, you might get this. So it's good to take that moment to say, here's what is really helpful. A picture of the whole plant, where it lives, right? I kind of want to see if there's a gutter that actually just dumps down onto that plant, or if it's out in the middle of a really dry spot, right? So I like to see a little bit around it. I like to see healthy and unhealthy. Healthy gives me normal, right? A scale object, if it's small, is really, really helpful. And just being in focus. This is really hard for a lot of people. Like, we can't always get to focus, but, like, we can get closer than that. So just talk people through it, right? Just give them an idea of it's a whole plant, it's a close-up of the area, healthy and unhealthy, right? These are these worksheets you can do, just leave it outside. Some of the major challenges you're gonna get. If you ask vague questions, you'll get vague answers, right? When did it start? I don't know. Have you seen it for the past year? Have you seen it for more than that? Has it always been in this spot, right? Like, more specific questions, get more specific answers. Obviously, look at the diagnostics chapter. I'm sure you guys all read it before class. And there are guides that are found in the plant clinic, but really it's just all about that 10-step working through, folks, of what's normal, how is it growing, plants, like diseases and disorders, and timing, right? And we don't have a log form, but just do have an intake form for samples. When you're working in the office, you'll learn about that from Tina, where we take information and we try to get some of this figured out. So it's about the plant species, the cultivar, planting sites, when it was planted, right? If something was planted within the past year or two, I'm like, it's probably a planting problem. Like, I probably know I have to track down a planting problem. When the problem began, how it's distributed, and how many plants is it affecting, and if they're the same plants or not, like if they're the same species or not. All right, again, just take people's contact information. You will typically never see me, you will rarely see me answer a question in the moment. I will take your contact information, I will take my time, I will take it back, I will look at it and make sure and double check, right? Because even if I know exactly what the disease is, I might not know how to treat it, right? I might not know the most up-to-date way to approach it, and it's always better just to take a second and like, take it down one whole notch, right? Like relieve the pressure. We always think better when there's less pressure. Just take a minute and really kind of think through what the answer is. And big picture, remember that just like people, healthy plants typically don't get really bad diseases out of the blue, right? Really bad health problems. What we're actually normally talking about is an abiotic stressor that led to a biotic problem, right? Even most insect damage I see, most diseases I see, if the plant is healthy, it'll shrug it off, right? It might get chewed on a couple leaves, but it'll just keep going. If it got chewed on a couple leaves and then that was all of a sudden way too much and like it gave up the ghost, there was something else going on, and it's typically abiotic. It's a cultural problem, right? When you see really bad diseases, that's way more common than anything else. So really it's just about right plant for the right place, right? Master gardener motto, and good cultural conditions. This will solve 99% of problems. And it's one of the reasons that, especially when I have a plant that has a really bad disease or a really bad insect problem, and someone says, which we all do, because we bought that plant because we loved it, can I just plant another one in the same spot? Why did the first one fail? Right? I had a spot in my garden where I tried to plant Daphne for like a good 3 years. Like a lot of Daphnes were like sacrificed to the gods of me wanting to plant in that spot. And then I was just like, I'm done, hosed as it is, right? Like it just wasn't the right spot. And it didn't matter how much permatil I added to the soil, how much I built it up, how much I tried to relieve the water problem. It just wasn't gonna happen, right? And I don't even, to this day, 100% understand why it was not gonna happen, but it wasn't meant to be. And so really, if a plant fails in a specific spot, it's worth thinking about why it failed and what might do better there, right? Not going back in with the same kind of solution over and over again. So I'll send these slides out, so don't worry about doing this, but these are some extra resources that Matt had compiled that are really, really helpful. We do have very specific, helpful tools for a lot of the vegetables, fruits and vegetables, because those are things that people grow for a living too. So there's been a lot of thought put into those. And I'll send all of that around, but I'll credit on this talk to Matt Jones and some of the state leadership. So with that, do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
Can you just again remind us about the plant and insect diagnostic clinic and how much it is for a sample? I mean, you've told us what's best to submit for a sample. Is the form online?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I'm going to show you the website so you can actually see it. So the question was about the plant disease and insect clinic. This is a clinic on NC State's, I can't type and speak at the same time, on NC State's campus. We can drop off samples there. It is always better to drop off samples through the agent, so through me or whoever the local agent is, just because I get a discount when I drop off samples. I think they're like trying to funnel things through the agents because we've actually filled out the forms enough times that like we have like an idea of what they're trying to do. So Matt Bertone, the guy who taught entomology, for example, he is the director of the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. He's really phenomenal. So the clinic, if you go to, I just Googled Plant Disease and Insect Clinic, but it's this PDIC website. And so you can submit samples. What's really cool about the clinic is that if you want to submit photo samples, that's free. you can like, I mean, don't abuse it, but you can do it until the cows come home, right? Like you can submit however, and they're fast too. They're very fast with photo samples. It's typically same day, I find. Physical samples might be $10. I'd have to look it up, but it's a nominal fee, especially for something that you really want to have figured out. Physical samples, you can always bring here, coordinate it with me, and I will drive it over to the clinic for you. I will submit your forms, I will drive it to the clinic for you, and they'll get back to you typically within a day. I'll be CC'd on it, so I'll be able to work it through with you. This is what we do when folks have problems they really can't figure out, right? Like that they really need figured out. Typically it's more for landscapers and farmers, like people whose like livelihood rests on them figuring it out. But certainly anyone can do it. Andrea Lane, when she was writing for the blog, actually I think wrote a whole blog post about her experience of submitting something to the clinic. And so what I would say is if you have photos especially, we can always do that. If you have a sample, we can do that too. One thing I will say is that for them, if you come into our office and you bring me this, like, we can do this, right? It's not ideal, I like more information, but we can do this. The clinic is going to be like, hey, I want the good pictures. Ideally, I want the whole plant, right? Because they're taking the time and they're really going to figure it out. And so I know I've taken like whole big full mature pepper plants over there. I've taken whole shrubs over there. Like you just wrap the whole thing up and like drop it off. And the benefit to that is that if you have large plantings and you're willing to sacrifice one of those plants, you can typically figure out what's going on with all of them, right? So check out their website though, it's pretty cool. They do all of their submissions online now. And again, photos are free. So it's kind of a cool thing. And they can do, well, plant diseases and insects. Anything you can throw it on. They can also do some in-house stuff. So we will typically do house molds through them and bed bug ID through them as well. Yeah, definitely had someone bring me a bed bug in a container last week. My job. Do you guys have any other questions? Okay, awesome. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our break. Today we are in the back, which is fun, so we'll be outside. And then we will be doing a disease and diagnostic exercise for the second half of class. And then at the end of class, we'll talk about next steps. Okay? All right. To the back. Oh, and I'll need some of you to bring your chairs.
Tell them about these free aloe plants that need homes.
Karen has also brought a bunch of really beautiful aloe plants if anyone wants to grab some. And she can tell you more about this. So,
I
yeah.
think I've given those all away over.
Oh, okay, you're good. Awesome.